Question 1. Under the assumption that Istaccato is responding to a refrigerant leak involving an unknown substance inside a commercial HVAC system, which step should he prioritize first before initiating any mitigation efforts? A. Attempt to patch the leak immediately using available sealing materials. B. Conduct a thorough hazard analysis and establish exclusion zones around the incident site. C. Ventilate the entire building by opening all doors and windows without any PPE. D. Remove all personnel from the site and wait for specialized hazardous materials teams. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. The first priority during a hazardous material leak incident is to conduct a thorough hazard analysis and establish exclusion zones, hot, warm, cold, per OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120 and EPA emergency response guidelines. This ensures personnel safety by controlling access based on risk levels before any mitigation or decontamination. Immediate patching, A, or ventilate. C, without hazard assessment and PPE can exacerbate exposure risks. While evacuating personnel, D, is important. Setting control zones is the critical initial step for site safety and effective incident management per the Incident Command System (ICS). This step aligns with OSHA's hazardous waste operations and emergency response HVACR standards. Question 2. Taking into account a scenario where SING is tasked with selecting personal protective equipment (PPE) to handle a spill of ammonia refrigerant at a moderate concentration, which PPE level is most appropriate based on OSHA EPE standards? A. Level fully encapsulating vapor-tight suit with self-contained breathing apparatus SCBA. B. Level B. Chemical resistant suit with SCBA but not vapor-tight. C. Level C. Air purifying respirator with splash resistant clothing. D. Level D. Standard work clothes without respiratory protection. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. For moderate concentrations of ammonia, level B PPE is recommended because it provides splash protection with SCBA for respiratory safety without the full vapor-tight encapsulation required in unknown or highly toxic atmospheres. Level A. OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120 outlines PPE selection based on exposure risk and substance properties. Level C is insufficient due to ammonia's high toxicity and potential for severe respiratory damage. Level D offers no respiratory protection and is only for non-hazardous conditions. Choosing the correct PPE level minimizes exposure risk while balancing mobility and protection. Question 3. Given the circumstances that Mr. Lopez finds a leaking container labeled with a Class 2.3 poisonous gas placard but the unknown number is missing, what should be Mr. Lopez's immediate action according to hazardous material regulations? A. Ignore the missing number since the placard identifies the hazard class. B. Consult the emergency response guidebook using the hazard class to identify the substance and take appropriate action. C. Attempt to transfer the contents to properly labeled container. D. Remove the placard to avoid alarming people nearby. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. When a container lacks the unknown number but displays a placard, responders must use the placard hazard class to reference the emergency response guidebook to identify potential risks and response protocols. 49 CFR 172 subpart F. Ignoring the missing number A can lead to incorrect handling and transferring the contents. C is hazardous without full identification and removing placards. D violates regulations and compromises safety. The ERG provides essential initial guidance based on hazard class, enabling safe incident management. Question 4. In light of recent developments in HVACR refrigerant technology, Evans is evaluating the health hazards posed by newer hydrofluorocarbon HFC refrigerants compared to older chlorofluorocarbon CFC types. Which of the following statements best describes the primary health difference you should consider? A. HFC refrigerants generally pose less ozone depletion but have a higher acute toxicity than CFCs, though HFCs are non-toxic and do not require any PPE during handling. C. CFC refrigerants are inert and non-toxic compared to HFCs. D. Both refrigerant types have the same level of chronic health hazards. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation: HFCS replaced CFCS primarily due to low ozone depletion potential, Montreal Protocol compliance. However, HFCS can have high acute toxicity and may cause respiratory irritation, cardiac sensitization, or central nervous system effects if improperly handled. EPA guidelines and OSHA standards. CFCS, while less acutely toxic, persist in the environment and deplete ozone. Neither completely harmless. Thus, proper PPE and ventilation remain essential. The key health difference is toxicity profiles, not absence of risk. Question 5. When considering decontamination procedures after a technician is exposed to a refrigerant spill with oil contamination, which decontamination approach is most appropriate to prevent secondary contamination and health risks? A. Gross decontamination followed by technical decontamination with specific solvents for compressor oil. B. Immediate dry brushing to remove all residues without any water. C. Allowing the oil to evaporate naturally before leaving the site. D. Using household detergents with a PPE. A non-designated area. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. Proper decontamination requires initial gross decontamination to remove bulk contaminants and then technical decontamination using solvents compatible with compressor oil and the material of PPE, following OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120. This minimizes secondary contamination and exposure. Dry brushing, B, can aerosolize hazardous materials, and natural evaporation is unsafe and prolongs exposure. Household detergents, D, are ineffective and unsafe without PPE or proper containment. Decontamination protocols protect personnel and the environment from residual hazardous substances. Question 6. From a practical standpoint, during a hazardous materials incident involving propane gas leakage at an HVACR site, which containment method should is new and prioritized to minimize fire and explosion risks? A. Use diking and damming to contain liquid propane pools on the ground. B. Apply dry absorbents directly to the propane vapor cloud. C. Initiate vapor suppression using foam agents to reduce vapor release. D. Increase ventilation without any containment efforts. Answer. Correct answer. C. Explanation. Propane is highly flammable, and vapor suppression using foam agency. G. AF is effective in minimizing vapor release and reducing fire explosion risk as recommended by NFPA 58 and EPA spill response guidelines. Diking A is more suitable for liquid pools, but propane vaporizes quickly. Dry absorbents, B, do not affect gases. Ventilation, D, without containment can spread flammable vapors, increasing hazards. Vapor suppression stabilizes the atmosphere and enhances safe mitigation. Question 7. Considering the evidence from recent emergency response cases, which of the following best describes the critical aspect of establishing exclusion zones during an HVACR hazardous material incident? A. Exclusion zones are set arbitrarily based on available space around the incident. B. The hot zone includes the contamination area where only fully protected personnel may enter. C. The cold zone is where hazardous materials are concentrated and requires the highest PPE level. D. Exclusion zones are not necessary if the incident involves non-toxic refrigerants. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Exclusion zones are based on risk assessment and site characterization, not arbitrary space allocation, contradicting A. The hot zone, or exclusion zone, includes the contamination area and requires the highest PPE level and restricted access per OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120. The cold zone is a safe area for support personnel and command post, not the contaminant zone, contradicting C. Even non-toxic refrigerants can pose physical hazards, so zones are always needed, contradicting D. Proper zone management is essential for safety and effective incident control. Question 8. When evaluating the merits of using air purifying respirators, ATRAs, versus self-contained breathing apparatus SCBA, during an HVACR refrigerant leak, which statement best reflects their appropriate application? A. ATRAs are suitable for unknown concentrations of toxic refrigerants. B. SCBAs provide independent air supply and are required for oxygen-deficient or highly toxic environments. C. ATRAs offer better protection than SCBAs in confined spaces. D. SCBAs should be avoided due to bulkiness and mobility constraints. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. S-Sabas supply breathable air independent of ambient atmosphere and are mandated by OSHA and NIOSH for oxygen-deficient or unknown highly toxic environments. 29 CFR 1910.134. APAs filter ambient air and are only suitable when the contaminant type and concentration are known and oxygen levels are adequate. APAs are unsafe for unknown or oxygen-deficient atmospheres, contradicting A. Despite bulkiness, S-Sabas provide the highest respiratory protection, contradicting C and D. Selecting respirators based on hazard assessment is critical for safety. Question 9. In the context of hazardous materials laws, Mr. Daniels is reviewing the requirements for documenting an HVAC refrigerant shipment that contains ozone-depleting substances. What is the essential documentation requirement under EPA regulations? Only a verbal statement to the carrier is needed for refrigerant shipment. B. Complete shipping papers including quantity, type of refrigerant, and certification of reclaim or recycling must accompany the shipment. C. No documentation is required for small quantities of refrigerant under 10 pounds. D. Shipping papers only need to state the refrigerant's common name. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. EPA regulations 40 CFR Part 82 require complete shipping papers that include refrigerant quantity, chemical type, and certification that refrigerant has been reclaimed or recycled per Clean Air Act requirements. This documentation ensures traceability and regulatory compliance. Verbal statements A and incomplete papers D are insufficient. Small quantities C are still regular, depending on transport mode and state laws. Proper documentation supports safe transport and environmental protection. Question 10. As demonstrated by an incident where improper container recognition led to a hazardous release, which of the following best describes the importance of understanding container types in hazardous material management for HVACR technicians? A. All containers used in HVACR are standardized and require no special recognition. B. Correct container recognition allows appropriate handling, PPE selection, and spill response tailored to the material's physical and chemical properties. C. Container recognition only matters for transportation personnel, not field technicians. D. Containers with damaged labels should be ignored as they are no longer valid. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. HVACR technicians must recognize container types e.g. cylinders, drums, bulk tanks to determine potential hazards such as pressure, chemical reactivity, and appropriate PPE and containment methods. 49 CFR and OSHA HVACR. This knowledge is critical for safe handling and emergency response. Assuming standardization is unsafe, the container recognition is vital for all response, including technicians. Contradicting C. Damaged labels require extra caution and should never be ignored. Contradicting D. Proper container identification reduces risk and enhances safety. Question 11. In the context of a hazardous refrigerant leak at a large commercial HVAC site, Mr. Patel must determine the appropriate exclusion zone boundaries. Given a volatile and toxic refrigerant release, what is the best approach for establishing these zones? A. Establish a cold zone directly surrounding the leak source to allow for quick personnel access. B. Define the hot zone around the contamination area, restricting access only to personnel in full level. A PC. Use a single exclusion zone encompassing the entire site to simplify control measures. D. Assign the warm zone to the area with highest vapor concentration and allow only non-P personnel to enter. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. According to OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120 and EPA emergency response standards, the hot zone is the area with actual contamination or hazard where only personnel equipped with the highest level of PPE level A can enter. The cold zone is a safe area for command and support personnel, while the warm zone acts as a buffer and is used for decontamination and support functions. Simplifying all zones into one. C. Reduces safety and control. Warm zones are restricted, not open to non-P personnel. D. Correct zone definition is essential for protecting responders and public. Question 12. Based on the information Mr. Thomas has regarding an HVACR compressor oil spill mixed with refrigerant, which chemical protective clothing consideration should guide his PPE selection? A. Use standard rubber gloves as compressor oil is non-toxic and non-corrosive. B. Select chemically resistant gloves and suits compatible with both oil and refrigerant to prevent skin absorption and chemical burns. C. Only respiratory protection is necessary, as skin contact with compressor oil is harmless. D. Use cotton clothing with no respiratory or chemical protection to maximize comfort. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Compressor oil can contain additives and break down products that are toxic and irritating, while refrigerants can cause frostbite and chemical burns. OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120 requires chemical-resistant protective clothing compatible with the substances involved. Standard rubber gloves may degrade and provide insufficient protection. Skin absorption and chemical burns are risks, making comprehensive PPE critical. Neglecting skin protection or respiratory equipment increases hazard exposure. Question 13. When analyzing the merits of using dry absorbents versus adsorbents during an HVAC or refrigerant spill, which best explains their appropriate use? A. Absorbents soak up liquids by penetration, while adsorbents bind contaminants on their surface. Both are suitable depending on the spill type. B. Dry absorbents and adsorbents function identically and can be used interchangeably. C. Adsorbents dissolve the refrigerant chemically, while absorbents neutralize the spill. D. Neither absorbents nor adsorbents are effective for refrigerant spills. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation. Absorbents, e.g., vermiculite, clay, physically soak up liquid spills, while adsorbents, e. activated carbon, bind chemicals to their surface without penetration. Selecting the correct material depends on the refrigerant's physical state and chemical properties. This distinction is outlined in EPA spill response and cleanup guides. They are not interchangeable, contradicting B. Neither chemically dissolve or neutralize refrigerants, contradicting C. Proper use enhances cleanup efficiency and safety. Question 14. With respect to HVACR hazardous material shipping, is Lewis verifying compliance with dot labeling and placarding requirements? Which of the following is true regarding placards for hazardous material shipments? A. Placards must be displayed on all four sides of the transport vehicle for shipments of 1,001 pounds or more of hazardous materials. B. Placards are optional for bulk shipments under 5,000 pounds. C. Only the shipping container requires placards, not the transport vehicle. D. Placards must be removed immediately after loading is complete. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation. Per dot 49 CFR 172.504, placards are required on all four sides of transport vehicles when carrying hazardous materials in quantities of 1,001 pounds or more to ensure visibility for emergency responders. Placards are not optional for bulk shipments over threshold amounts, contradicting B. Shipping containers have labels, not placards. Placards are for vehicles, contradicting C. Placards must remain displayed during transport and cannot be removed prematurely, contradicting D. Question 15. Considering the evidence from HVACR emergency response protocols, Mr. Garcia is tasked with selecting the most effective ventilation method after a refrigerant vapor release indoors. Which ventilation strategy minimizes hazard spread and exposure? A. Use positive pressure ventilation to force fresh air inward from all sides. B. Implement natural ventilation by opening windows at low points only. C. Employ mechanical ventilation to create controlled airflow from clean areas to contaminated areas, exhausting outdoors. D. Shut all ventilation systems off to prevent vapor spread. Answer. Correct answer. C. Explanation. Control mechanical ventilation directing airflow from uncontaminated, clean zones to contaminated zones. Venting outdoors minimizes cross-contamination and exposure. EPA and OSHA HAZWOPA guidelines. Positive pressure ventilation. They can push vapors into safe areas, increasing risk. Natural ventilation alone is unpredictable and often insufficient. B. Shutting off ventilation. D. Traps vapors inside. Risk. Proper ventilation is critical for effective hazard mitigation. Question 16. When faced with a scenario where Alvarez detects a refrigerant leak in an HVACR system containing R22, which is being phased out under EPA SNAP program, what considerations should she keep in mind regarding environmental compliance? A. R22 can be vented freely as long as the leak is small. B. All venting of R22 during maintenance or disposal is prohibited under EPA regulations. C. R22 leaks require immediate repair but no documentation. D. R22 is not regulated since alternatives exist. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. EPA's significant new alternatives policy, SNAP, prohibits venting of ozone-depleting substances like R22 under 40 CFR Part 82. Venting any quantity during maintenance or disposal is illegal. Immediate repair is required and proper documentation of leak repair and refrigerant handling must be maintained, contradicting C. R22 remains regulated until fully phased out. Free venting, A, or ignoring regulations, D, violates Clean Air Act provisions and may incur penalties. Question 17. Under the assumption that ISTA-UN is managing an incident involving combustible dust accumulation in an HVACR maintenance area, which preventive measure aligns best with OSHA and NFPA guidelines to reduce explosion risks? A. Regular housekeeping to remove dust deposits and ensure proper ventilation. B. Allowing dust accumulation since it is non-hazardous in HVACR environments. C. Using open flames to burn off combustible dust. D. Ignoring dust buildup as long as electrical equipment is grounded. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. OSHA 29 CFR 1910.22 requires good housekeeping to prevent combustible dust accumulation, while NFPA 654 provides guidelines to reduce dust explosion risks through ventilation and dust control. Dust buildup is hazardous. Ignoring it, B and D, or using open flames, C, can lead to catastrophic explosions. Effective dust control is a key strategy for safety. Question 18. From the perspective of emergency response communication, Robinson is leading a hazardous material incident. Which communication practice best ensures efficient and safe operations? A. Use standardized codes and terminology as defined by the Incident Command System (ICS). B. Allow responders to use personal communication methods without protocol. C. Communicate hazard information only at the end of the incident. D. Avoid documenting communications to reduce administrative burden. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. Effective communication following ICS protocols ensures clarity, reduces confusion, and enhances safety during hazardous material incidents. FEMA ICS guidelines and OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120. Personal or ad hoc communication. B. Risks miscommunication. Delayed hazard communication. C. Endangers responders and public. Documentation. D. Is essential. Accountability and post-incident analysis. Standardized communication supports coordinated response. Question 19. When analyzing the physical properties of refrigerants, Jackson must consider the importance of vapor pressure in relation to containment and leak risks. Which statement best reflects this relationship? A. High vapor pressure refrigerants evaporate quickly, increasing leak and exposure risks. B. Vapor pressure has no impact on refrigerant leak hazards. C. Low vapor pressure refrigerants are more likely to vaporize at room temperature. D. Vapor pressure only affects refrigerant efficiency, not safety. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. Refrigerants with high vapor pressure evaporate rapidly at ambient temperatures, creating a greater potential for leaks and hazardous vapor exposure. ASHRAE Handbook Fundamentals. Understanding vapor pressure helps technicians anticipate containment needs and select appropriate leak detection and PPE. Ignoring vapor pressure BD risks underestimating hazards. Low vapor pressure refrigerants tend to remain liquid longer, reducing immediate vapor hazards, contradicting C. Question 20. In terms of hazardous materials incident waste management, Carter must ensure proper disposal of contaminated PPE after responding to an HVACR refrigerant leak. Which practice complies with hazardous waste regulations? A. Dispose of contaminated PPE as regular trash to avoid complicating waste handling. B. Decontaminate PPE thoroughly and reuse without any special handling. C. Collect contaminated PPE in labeled hazardous waste containers and coordinate disposal through licensed waste handlers. D. Burn contaminated PPE or site to destroy hazards immediately. Answer. Correct answer. C. Explanation. OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120 and EPA Resource Conservation and Recovery RA require contaminated EP to be segregated, labeled, and disposed of via licensed hazardous waste disposal companies to prevent environmental contamination and personnel exposure. Regular trash disposal A and on-site burning D are illegal and dangerous. Reuse with decontamination or special handling B risk secondary contamination. Proper waste management is essential for legal compliance and safety. Question 21. Given the circumstances that ISTA Morales is responding to, a refrigerant leak from an HVACR system using ammonia, which of the following is the most critical health hazard he should be aware of during initial exposure? A. Chronic neurological damage due to long-term exposure. B. Immediate respiratory irritation and potential pulmonary edema. C. Skin dryness without systemic toxicity. D. Hearing loss caused by high-pressure release noise. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. Ammonia is a highly irritating and corrosive gas that primarily affects the respiratory system upon acute exposure, potentially causing pulmonary edema and respiratory distress. OSHA 29 CFR 1910.1000 and NIOSH Pocket Guide. Chronic neurological effects are less common compared to acute respiratory hazards. Skin exposure can cause burns but is less likely to produce alone. C. Hearing loss. D is unrelated to ammonia's chemical hazard. Awareness of acute respiratory risks guides immediate response and PPE selection. Question 22. Under the assumption that ISCHEN is selecting respirators for an incident involving R400 refrigerant leakage, which statement accurately describes the respirator choice considering OSHA respiratory protection standards? A. An air purifying respirator APA with organic vapor cartridges is sufficient for all concentrations. B. A self-contained breathing apparatus SCBA is required if the oxygen level is unknown or below 19.5%. C. No respiratory protection is needed due to the low toxicity of R400. D. A surgical mask provides adequate protection against refrigerant vapors. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. OSHA 29 CFR 1910.134 requires SCBA in oxygen-deficient or unknown atmospheres, which is common in refrigerant leaks due to displacement of oxygen by refrigerant vapors. APRAs A are only suitable when the contaminant and concentration are known and oxygen levels are adequate. R400, while having low acute toxicity, can cause asphyxiation and frostbite, contradicting C. Surgical masks D offer no protection from chemical vapors. Respirator selection must prioritize safety based on hazard and oxygen levels. Question 23. When evaluating ISTA O'Neill's site control measures during hazardous materials incident involving flammable refrigerant, which of the following best describes the purpose of the warm zone? A. The area where contamination is highest and only fully encapsulated PPE is allowed. B. The transition area between contaminated and clean zones used for decontamination and support. C. The unrestricted safe zone where no PPE is required. D. The perimeter around the incident that controls public access only. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. The warm zone serves as a buffer and transition area between the hot, contaminated, and cold, clean zones, designated for decontamination, equipment staging, and support personnel per OSHA HAZWOPA guidelines. The hot zone A is where the hazard is present and requires full PPE. The cold zone C is the safe area where no PPE is necessary. Perimeter control D is part of the cold zone function. Proper zone setup ensures safety and contamination control. Question 24. From the perspective of hazardous material laws, White is reviewing regulations about venting refrigerants during system maintenance. What is the legal status of venting Class I ozone-depleting refrigerants under EPA's Clean Air Act? A. Completely prohibited except during emergencies posing imminent danger. B. Allowed if refrigerant is captured and recycled later. C. Permitted freely for minor leaks under 5 pounds. D. Allowed if venting is done outdoors with proper ventilation. Answer. Correct answer. Explanation. Under the EPA Clean Air Act, Section 608, venting Class I ozone-depleting substances like CFCs and some HFCs is prohibited except when release poses immediate danger to safety. 40 CFR Part 82. Capturing and recycling. B is required to prevent atmospheric release. Minor leaks, C, are not exempt. Outdoor venting, D, still constitutes a release and is illegal. Compliance with these regulations is critical for environmental protection and legal adherence. Question 25. Taking into account a spill scenario, Mr. Jackson must decide the most appropriate containment method to manage a liquid refrigerant leak that has spread on a concrete floor. Which method should he prioritize? A. Use diking to encircle and contain the liquid to prevent further spread. B. Absorb the refrigerant with standard paper towels. C. Ignore containment and focus solely on ventilation. D. Use open flame torches to evaporate the liquid quicker. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation. Diking involves creating physical barriers around spilled liquids to contain them and prevent further migration, which is critical for controlling liquid refrigerants and minimizing exposure. EPA and OSHA spill response guidelines. Paper towels, B, are ineffective for hazardous liquids. Ignoring containment. C, increases hazard spread. Using flames. D, risks ignition and explosion. Proper containment is fundamental. Fill control and responder safety. Question 26. Which of the following best explains why PPE inspection is a critical step before donning during hazardous materials response, as Easterly demonstrates? A. To ensure PPE is clean and aesthetically pleasing. B. To identify any physical damage, leaks, or defects that could compromise protection. C. To ensure that PPE fits loosely for comfort during response. D. To allow sharing of PPE among responders to conserve resources. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120 requires inspection of PPE prior to use to detect tears, cracks, chemical degradation, or malfunction that could lead to exposure. Proper inspection ensures PPE integrity and responder safety. Cleanliness A is secondary to functional integrity. PPE must fit snugly, not loosely. C. To prevent leaks. Sharing PPE. D. With proper decontamination risks cross-contamination and is unsafe. Question 27. With the advent of newer refrigerants, Mr. Simmons must understand the importance of reviewing material safety data sheet (ADS) during an HVACR hazardous material incident. What critical information does ADS provide for emergency response? A. Chemical composition, physical hazards, health risks, and recommend PPE and first aid measures. B. Only the chemical formula and trade name. C. General maintenance procedures for HVACR equipment. D. Sales and pricing information for refrigerants. Answer. Correct answer. A. Explanation. ADS provide comprehensive hazard communication, including chemical identity, physical and health hazards, safe handling, PPE requirements, emergency procedures, and first aid instructions. OSHA Hazard Communication Standard 29 CFR 1910.1200. This information is essential for safe incident response. Limited info. B. Maintenance. C. Or sales data. D. Support emergency response and hazard management. Question 20. In terms of hazardous material container recognition, is Gomez encounters a leaking cylinder with a rusty valve and unclear labeling. What is the best immediate action according to DOT and OSHA standards? A. Attempt to open the valve to relieve pressure and identify contents. B. Secure the area, notify hazardous material response personnel, and avoid direct contact. C. Remove the label and replace it with a handwritten note. D. Transfer contents to a new container without PPE to prevent spills. Answer. Correct answer. B. Explanation. A leaking container with damaged valve and unclear labels presents an unknown hazard. Immediate area control and notification to trained hazardous materials teams is critical to prevent exposure or escalation. 49 CFR 172.600 and OSHA 29 CFR 1910.120. Opening valves, say, or transferring contents. D. Without prop PPE and training is highly dangerous. Replacing labels. C. Without proper identification risks misinformation and regulatory violation. Question 29. The underlying principle of patching and plugging leaks during an HVACR hazardous material incident involves which of the following? A. Temporarily isolating the leak to minimize release while planning for permanent repair. B. Permanently sealing the system regardless of conditions. C. Using any available adhesive to close the leak without hazard assessment. D. Ignoring small leaks as they will dissipate naturally. Answer. Correct answer A. Explanation. Patching and plugging are interim containment methods to minimize hazardous releases until permanent repairs can be safely completed. NFPA 472 and OSHA 1910.120. Permanent sealing. B. Requires plan, repairing, controlled conditions, using random adhesives. C. Without hazard evaluation can worsen leaks or cause reactions. Ignoring leaks. D. Violates standards and increases exposure risk. Proper patching is a key spill control skill. Question 30. While examining refrigerant hazards, Mr. Davis notes that some refrigerants have low toxicity but high flammability. How should this influence his hazard assessment and response? A. Prioritize ignition control measures and use intrinsically safe equipment to prevent fire or explosion. B. Focus only on toxicity hazards and ignore flammability. C. Use an OPP since low toxicity means low risk. D. Ventilate only after extinguishing any ignition sources. Answer. Correct answer and explanation. Flammable refrigerants, e.g. hydrocarbons, pose significant fire and explosion risks even if their toxicity is low. Hazard assessment must prioritize ignition control, proper grounding, and intrinsically safe tools per NFPA 70 and OSHA standards. Ignoring flammability, B for EPC is unsafe. Ventilation, D should be continuous and coupled with ignition control, not delayed. Comprehensive hazard recognition prevents incidents.